So let's start editing our image. Let's make sure that we're in the edit panel by clicking on this icon right here. And then where we see the word edit, to the right, we see three options: auto option, black and white option, and HDR option. Now, I'm not going to talk about these guys right away because I think it's important to understand how to, use these panels that are here. And then once we understand that, then we can come back and choose auto or black and white. I'm going to be leaving the HDR option for later in the course because I think it's important that we understand how the tonal controls work and how the color information can be manipulated before we get into working with HDR stuff. Okay, so that being said, let's come over here. Notice that when I click on the light panel, all the other ones collapse. And when I click on the color panel, the light panel collapses. So what I want to be able to do is show you both color and light at the same time. In order to do that, we need to go to the Preferences panel. So we're going to click on that, and we're going to come over to the General category here. And in the Panels section, we're going to make sure that this has been changed from single, as you've seen right now how it works, to multiple, meaning that we can have multiple panels displaying themselves, and they'll stay open until we physically close them. So let's just do that, and we're going to click OK. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's click on this to have both the light and the color panels showing. So what I want to talk about first of all is the tonal adjustments that can be made in the light panel. Starting at the top of the list of sliders, if you will, is the exposure. And I think we understand that increasing or decreasing the exposure will lighten or darken the whole image. And you're affecting the tones throughout the image going in both directions. One of the things I want to point out to you is, as I'm going to be explaining things here, you're going to see me double clicking on the sliders. Double clicking any slider will set things back to the default. So the exposure will lighten or darken your image. Contrast will lighten the lighter areas and will darken the darker areas at the same time. If I move my contrast slider to the right, I'm going to be increasing the contrast in my image, as you can see in the preview window. And if I move my slider to the left, you're going to see that I am reducing the contrast and therefore producing a flatter toned image. Double click. Working on highlights and shadows is going to lighten, for the most part, the light stuff. Keep an eye on the histogram. And going to darken stuff. There's limitations to how much these sliders will allow you to move stuff around, and that's to help you or stop you from, completely destroying your image. There are other options available to us in other panels that will allow us to go further, but for now, let's just deal with this. And the same thing with the shadow ends. Notice the shadow end here and this stuff here. If I move my shadow slider to the right, you can see how we've opened that up. And if I move it to the left, we've closed things down. The next thing is your whites and your blacks. Your whites are the brightest areas in your image, but also as we pull, let me just double click that for a second, as we pull our highlights, and you can see down here, this is my highlight or my whites area here. As we pull the whites to the right, we're also grabbing some of this information and moving that along as well. So as I move this along, you can see that the histogram is moving to the right as well, eventually. Notice that when I go too far, you're going to see a clipping indicator come on. And that just tells me that I've gone too far. Right now it's turned to yellow, and that means one or two of the three channels in our image, channels meaning the red, green, and blue. One or two of them has been clipped. By the time I go to white, that means that in the brightest areas, there is no color information whatsoever. If I double click that and put it back, if I come down this way, you can see that we're pulling away from the extreme bright ends of things. And it's the same thing, but kind of opposite for the blacks. If I go to the right, I'll be lightening the blacks, and I'll also be lightening the gray areas as well. You see how we're pushing and pulling all this stuff around? And if I come this way, notice if I come here, I'm at 0 right now. And if I just move a little bit to the left in the blacks, that indicator for clipping is going to show up. See, when I move the black slider to the left, ever so slightly, my clipping indicator will turn to a blue triangle. That means 2 of the 3 color channels, possibly 2 of the 3 color channels have been clipped. And if I just go a little bit further, turns white, that means there are areas in the image that have no information whatsoever, and it will just be pure black. So double click on that, and that's not a bad thing. And moving your white slider all the way till you get clipping is not a bad thing either. It's image dependent. Okay, so how much do we move these sliders around? Well, you're going to have to play around to see what's going on. But, and here's the big but, I love this auto button. And when I click this auto button, we're going to get not only stuff going on here. Okay, so now that we understand what these sliders will do and the kind of information that gets moved around with each slider, if I bring my cursor up into the histogram, you can see that there's a grouping that goes on here, and there's words down here that indicate the area I'm affecting. So that would be blacks. If I move my cursor to the right, we're going to be in the shadow ends. If I go in the middle, a little bit more to the right, we're going to be what used to be known as midtones, but it's called exposure now. And then we have highlights. And then at the far right, we have the whites. Okay, so now if I want to affect change in here, but I don't know which ways to move and all that kind of stuff and all that, if I hold down the Shift key, I get something called auto exposure. If I click on that, the software will move the exposure or the midtones to the right a little bit and giving me something that looks, I don't know, does it look better? If I hold down the Option key, I can click Reset, and there we go. So now, if I hold down the Shift key, I'm going to get auto exposure, auto contrast, highlights, and all that kind of stuff. And if I click on that, I look and it made the image better. And I click on contrast and go to the highlights, and it brought the highlights down. Notice up here, the histogram. And I'm going to go auto shadows, auto whites, and auto blacks. And I'm going to look at that, and I'm going to say, hey, that's not too bad. But how can I actually see this as a comparative? Well, I can come over here and click on the eyeball here. And that's what the image looked like before. And that's what it looks like with the auto adjustment. I'm going to hold down the Option key, and I'm going to click Reset, because I want everything to be reset right there. Then what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to come down to the bottom of this interface down here, and on the left hand side there is an icon I can click which will allow me to cycle the before and after. So if I click on that, I now have on the left hand side before and on the right hand side after, but I haven't done anything yet, so they're identical. But as soon as I click on, as an example, the auto exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, we can now see what it looked like before and what it looks like afterwards. I think it's pretty cool. Yeah. Okay. So if we want to get rid of this, there's probably a handful of ways to do it. I am going to hold down the Control key and I'm going to click. You see these 3 icons here? They, this one here says cycles between before and after. swap between after and before. So I'd be putting this guy on that side and the other side. This one here is copy current settings to the before option P. If you see, there's a little white triangle down there. If I hold down the control key and click on that, I get a contextual menu showing me all of these things, and I'm just going to choose single view. Single view brings me back to where I was before, and then I can go back to the usual or the earlier way of showing and hiding what I was working on. So if I hold down the option key, I can click reset here, or I can click reset there. So I'm good with that. So now I'm not going to talk about the black and white conversion yet. I just want to stay in the color realm of things at this point in time. And something else I want to show you with respects to what's going on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click on this to get the before and the after. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click over here and I'm going to choose a profile from the Adobe group. So let's go up here, go to the Adobe Raw, and I'm going to come down here and I'm going to choose neutral. And if I come back over here, profile chosen is Adobe Neutral. And you can see this is what Adobe Neutral looks like compared to the camera standard version. Now, if I come over here and if I hold down the Shift key and click on auto exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, I get different numbers than I had with my Nikon profile. And the image doesn't look quite as impressive as far as I'm concerned. So if I wanted to get my image to kind of look a little bit closer to that, I'd have to start mucking around with these guys. All right. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to choose camera standard. So there we go. We have that. Now this is showing me, and I'm going to hit reset and then hit auto exposure, come in, do this, this, and this. And now we can see, again, the difference between auto exposure and auto contrast and auto in the light panel individually. We don't have to click on every one of these guys, but I've done that in this example, trying to explain a few things to you. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the option key. I'm going to hit reset to get my tones back to the original. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the auto button up here. So the auto button up here is going to give me the tone adjustments that are very, very similar to when I clicked on the auto enhancements here. But the other thing that has happened is when I click auto, it also affected in the color panel. You can see this, it's now +17 and +2. And if I hold down the option key to click reset, you can see that they go back to 0. Everything goes back to 0. Now, dealing with the auto, I can click on that, we get that. And I'm saying to myself, you know, one or the other. Kind of like this. Kind of like this. Now, the only thing is, in the white balance options here, auto is not chosen. We'll deal with that when we come into the color panel. Okay, so I'm going to reset that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here. I'm going to click on the black and white conversion. And if I click on that, we get a nice grayscale. Now, if I want to get these guys to have some adjustments, I'm thinking all I have to do is click on the auto button here, and all the adjustments come back. They are different than they were when it was in color, but we're sitting in the Adobe monochrome option here. Notice also down in the color panel here, we have no vibrance or saturation options to play around with. There's more to this, and we'll get into that as we move further through different panels in here. But for now, we've got this, and it's actually looking quite good. I'm going to hold down the Option or Alt key, Then I'm going to click, first of all, let's get out of black and white, and then I'm going to click reset for that, and then I'm going to hold down the control key and get this contexture menu to come up and show me single view. I think that's all I really wanted to cover off with the light panel. Up next is the color panel.